clock struck 6, casting a deep, resonant chime through the empty hallways of Crestwood High School. Most of the students and faculty had left hours ago, but a small group of 5 students remained behind, engrossed in their various after-school activities. The sun had set, and the building's fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Jake, the school newspaper editor, was finalizing an article in the computer lab. Emma and Mia, members of the drama club, were rehearsing lines in the auditorium. Kevin, the star basketball player, was practicing free throws in the gym. And Lisa, a dedicated member of the science club, was conducting an experiment in the lab. Each was absorbed in their tasks, oblivious to the creeping darkness that slowly engulfed the school. As the minutes ticked by, a chill settled in the air. The familiar hum of the school's electrical system seemed to dull, replaced by an almost imperceptible whispering that echoed faintly through the hallways. It was the kind of sound that could easily be dismissed as the building settling, yet there was something unnervingly human about it. Jake was the first to notice. He paused mid-sentence, lifting his head and straining to listen. The whispers seemed to grow louder, a hissing murmur that prickled his skin. He shook his head, trying to dispel the sense of unease that crept over him. "Just my imagination," he muttered to himself, returning to his work. In the auditorium, Emma and Mia were deep in their roles, their voices ringing out clearly in the empty space. Emma, ever the dramatic one, halted abruptly and frowned. "Did you hear that?" she asked, glancing around the darkened theater. Mia, ever practical, rolled her eyes. "Hear what? You're just trying to spook me." Emma shook her head, her expression serious. "No, really. I heard something, like whispering." A shiver ran down Mia's spine, but she forced a laugh. "Come on, let's just get through this scene. It's probably just the wind or something." In the gym, Kevin was in the zone, his mind focused solely on the rhythmic sound of the basketball hitting the court. He didn't notice the whispers at first, but as they grew louder, they began to weave into his concentration, causing him to miss his shots. Frustrated, he wiped sweat from his brow and glanced around, expecting to see one of his friends playing a prank. But the gym was empty, and the whispers continued, a relentless, ghostly chorus. Lisa, meanwhile, was bent over her experiment, meticulously recording data. She almost didn't hear the whispers over the bubbling of her chemical concoction, but when a particularly loud hiss echoed through the lab, she froze. Her heart pounded as she listened, the sound almost seeming to form words just beyond her comprehension. One by one, the students' curiosity and fear got the better of them. They ventured into the hallways, their footsteps echoing in the unnaturally silent building. They met at the crossroads of the main corridor, their faces pale and eyes wide with shared trepidation. "Did you hear it too?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded, her usual bravado nowhere to be seen. "Yeah, it sounded like whispering. But no one's here." Kevin's fists clenched. "This is ridiculous. Someone's messing with us." Lisa shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't think so. It felt wrong. Like someone was trying to talk to me." The group huddled together, their collective anxiety palpable. They decided to stick together and search the school, hoping to find a logical explanation for the whispers that seemed to follow them wherever they went. As they walked, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, guiding them deeper into the heart of the school. It wasn't long before they found themselves standing before a door that none of them had noticed before. It was an old wooden door, its paint chipped and peeling, with a tarnished brass handle that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. A faded sign above it read, Room 217. Jake reached out, his hand trembling as he grasped the handle. He hesitated, looking back at his friends, who nodded in silent encouragement. With a deep breath, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. As they stepped inside, the whispers ceased abruptly, plunging the room into a suffocating silence. The only sound was the rapid beating of their hearts, echoing in the oppressive stillness. And then, in the far corner of the room, a shadow moved. The air in room 217 was heavy with neglect, the floorboards creaking underfoot as the group ventured further into the gloom. Lisa, ever the curious one, fumbled for a light switch, but the room remained stubbornly dark. Only the faint glow of their phones provided any illumination, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance and twist around them. Emma took a tentative step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this place? I didn't even know this room existed." Jake nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "It's been abandoned for years, by the looks of it. But why? And why now?" In the far corner, the shadow shifted again, catching Kevin's attention. He raised his phone, the beam of light cutting through the darkness to reveal a forgotten classroom. Desks and chairs lay scattered haphazardly, covered in a thick layer of dust. On the walls, faded posters from another era hung in tatters, their messages long since obscured by time. As they moved deeper into the room, Mia's gaze fell upon an old, battered desk at the front. It was larger than the others, clearly meant for a teacher. Her breath caught in her throat as she noticed something on its surface. Papers, yellowed with age, and a framed photograph, its glass cracked. She picked up the photo, her hands trembling. The image showed a stern-looking woman with sharp features and piercing eyes, standing in front of a younger version of Crestwood High School. Her expression was one of pride, yet there was an undercurrent of something darker, something unresolved. Jake peered over Mia's shoulder. That must be her, the ghost we've been hearing. Lisa, who had been inspecting the walls, suddenly gasped. "Guys, over here!" The group gathered around her, their lights revealing a hidden compartment in the wall. With some effort, they managed to pry it open, revealing a stack of old newspapers and a diary, its cover worn and brittle. Emma opened the diary carefully, her fingers tracing the faded ink. This belonged to her, the teacher in the photo. Her name was Mrs. Hawthorne. Mia shuddered. What happened to her? Why is she haunting this place? As they flipped through the diary, the story began to unfold. Mrs. Hawthorne had been a beloved teacher at Crestwood High, known for her strict but fair demeanor. However, a scandal had rocked the school many years ago. Mrs. Hawthorne had been accused of something terrible, a crime she vehemently denied but was ultimately blamed for. Her reputation ruined, she had disappeared one night, never to be seen again. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. She was innocent. According to this, she was framed by someone. But who? Kevin clenched his fists, a sense of anger welling up inside him. And now she's back, seeking revenge for what happened to her. She wants justice. Just then, the air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. The group felt a chill run down their spines as they realized they were not alone. The shadow in the corner seemed to grow, taking a more defined shape, a shape that resembled Mrs. Hawthorne. Jake stepped forward, his voice firm but respectful. Mrs. Hawthorne, we know what happened to you. We want to help. Please tell us what we need to do. The shadow seemed to pause, the whispers swirling around them like a whirlwind. Then, with a sudden clarity, The words became understandable. Find the truth. Uncover the lie. Only then will I rest. The lights flickered, and the room plunged into darkness once more. When the lights came back on, the shadow was gone, but the sense of unease remained. The students knew what they had to do: uncover the truth behind Mrs. Hawthorne's tragic fate and bring her the justice she deserved. As they left the forgotten classroom, the weight of their task pressed heavily upon them. The hallways of Crestwood High seemed darker than before, the whispers following them like a haunting refrain. They had taken the first step into a mystery that was far from over, and they knew that the path ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. But together, they would face whatever horrors awaited them, determined to right the wrongs of the past. The days following their discovery of room 217 were marked by a growing sense of dread among the group. They had gathered every piece of information they could find about Mrs. Hawthorne, scouring old yearbooks, newspapers, and archived records in the library. The mystery of her wrongful accusation and subsequent disappearance loomed over them like a dark cloud. As they delved deeper into the past, strange occurrences began to plague their lives. At first, it was small things: a textbook falling off a shelf, the lights flickering in their classrooms, a sudden chill in the air. But soon, the incidents escalated. Emma was the first to experience something truly unsettling. One evening, as she was rehearsing alone in the auditorium, she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. She spun around, but the room was empty. Her heart pounded as she called out, "Is anyone there?" The only response was the echo of her own voice. In the gym, Kevin found himself struggling to focus during practice. The basketball seemed to have a mind of its own, slipping from his hands at crucial moments. He could feel eyes on him, an unseen presence watching his every move. One night, as he stayed late to practice free throws, he saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the gym. When he blinked, it was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. Lisa's experience was perhaps the most terrifying. While working late in the science lab, she noticed the room growing colder, her breath visible in the air. The whispers returned, louder than ever, surrounding her like a spectral chorus. She tried to ignore them, focusing on her experiment, but the whispers became insistent, almost angry. Suddenly, the beakers and flasks on her desk shattered, glass flying in all directions. She screamed and ran from the lab, convinced that Mrs. Hawthorne was warning them. Jake and Mia also felt the ghost's presence. Jake often stayed late in the computer lab, working on articles for the school newspaper. One night, as he typed away, the computer screen flickered, and the text on the screen distorted into a jumble of letters. His fingers froze on the keyboard as the letters reformed into a message: "Find the truth." Mia, still skeptical despite everything, began to see glimpses of Mrs. Hawthorne in her dreams. The ghostly figure would stand at the foot of her bed, eyes filled with sorrow and rage, whispering incomprehensible words. Mia would wake up drenched in sweat. The image of the tormented teacher burned into her mind. The group convened in the library, their faces pale and eyes haunted by sleepless nights. "We have to do something," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "She's getting more aggressive. We need to figure this out before someone gets hurt." Jake nodded, determination hardening his features. "We need to find out who framed her. The answer has to be in the school's records somewhere." Emma shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "But where do we even start? We've gone through so much already." Kevin leaned forward, his expression grim. "We start by finding out who stood to gain the most from her downfall. There has to be a motive." They divided the tasks among themselves, each taking a different aspect of the investigation. Jake focused on old faculty records. Emma and Mia delved into student records from Mrs. Hawthorne's time. Lisa combed through financial records, and Kevin investigated any rumors or stories that had circulated about Mrs. Hawthorne. Days turned into weeks as they pieced together fragments of the past. Each discovery brought them closer to the truth, but also intensified the haunting. The ghost of Mrs. Hawthorne seemed to grow more desperate, her presence more oppressive. The whispers became a constant background noise, a reminder of the stakes they faced. One evening, as they gathered in the library to compare notes, a sudden chill filled the room. The lights flickered and dimmed, and the whispers swelled to a deafening roar. The group huddled together, fear gripping their hearts. A shadowy figure materialized before them, the ghostly form of Mrs. Hawthorne. Her eyes burned with a mixture of anger and sorrow as she raised a translucent hand, pointing to an old, dusty yearbook on a nearby shelf. The whispers coalesced into a single word. Look. Emma grabbed the yearbook with trembling hands, flipping through its pages. Her eyes widened as she found a photograph of Mrs. Hawthorne, surrounded by a group of students. One student in particular stood out, a young man with a sneer on his face, his arm draped arrogantly over her shoulders. Lisa's breath hitched. That's him. That must be the one who framed her. The ghost of Mrs. Hawthorne nodded slowly, her form flickering. The intensity of her presence lessened, as if acknowledging their progress. The figure began to fade, leaving them with a sense of both urgency and hope. We're getting closer, Jake said, his voice filled with resolve. We need to find out who this guy is and what he did. Only then can we help her find peace. As the ghostly presence dissipated, the group knew their journey was far from over. They had uncovered a crucial piece of the puzzle, but the path to the truth was still fraught with danger and uncertainty. The haunting would not cease until they brought justice to Mrs. Hawthorne, and they were determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The photograph had given them a vital clue, but it was only the beginning. The group gathered in the library, their expressions a mixture of fear and determination. The young man in the photo, with his sneering face and arrogant posture, had to be the key to unlocking Mrs. Hawthorne's tragic past. Jake scanned the yearbook for a name. There, he pointed, his finger hovering over the caption beneath the photograph. William Billy Preston. Emma frowned, her brows furrowed in concentration. Preston. That name sounds familiar. Isn't there a Preston building on campus? Kevin's eyes widened. Yeah, it's named after one of the school's biggest donors. Could it be the same family? Lisa nodded. It would make sense. If Billy Preston was connected to the school's wealthiest benefactors, he might have had the influence to frame Mrs. Hawthorne. Their research took a new direction, delving into the Preston family's history. The more they uncovered, the clearer the picture became. Billy Preston had been a troublemaker, known for his rebellious attitude and a penchant for causing problems. His father, a powerful and influential figure in the community, had often used his wealth to cover up Billy's misdeeds. As they sifted through old newspaper articles and archived records, a disturbing pattern emerged. Billy had been involved in several scandals, each one quietly swept under the rug. But the incident with Mrs. Hawthorne had been different. This time, someone had to take the fall, and she had been the perfect scapegoat. Emma discovered a particularly damning article in an old newspaper. Listen to this, she read aloud. In 1985, Mrs. Clara Hawthorne was accused of inappropriate conduct with a student. Despite her impeccable record and vehement denials, she was dismissed from her position at Crestwood High. The student involved was William Preston. Mia's face paled. So they accused her of something she didn't do to protect Billy. Jake clenched his fists. She was innocent, but no one believed her, and the Preston family made sure she took the blame. Their investigation led them to an old faculty member, Mr. Harrison, who had taught at Crestwood during Mrs. Hawthorne's tenure. Now retired, he lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town. They decided to pay him a visit, hoping he could provide more insights into the events of that fateful year. Mr. Harrison greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "I remember Clara well," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "She was one of the best teachers we ever had. What happened to her was a travesty." The group sat in Mr. Harrison's living room, listening intently as he recounted the story. Clara was dedicated, strict, but fair. She genuinely cared about her students. But Billy Preston, he was a troublemaker from the start. He didn't like being disciplined, and when Clara tried to rein him in, he retaliated. He paused, his eyes distant. Billy spread rumors about Clara, saying she had acted inappropriately towards him. Given his father's influence, it wasn't long before those rumors became truth. Clara was devastated. She pleaded her innocence, but no one listened. The Prestons made sure of that. Lisa's voice was soft, filled with empathy. "What happened to her after she left the school?" Mr. Harrison sighed. "She disappeared. Some say she left town, unable to bear the shame. Others believe she took her own life. But no one really knows. All we have are rumors and whispers." The group exchanged glances, the weight of the truth settling heavily upon them. They now understood why Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit was restless. She had been wronged, her life destroyed by a lie, and she sought justice from beyond the grave. As they left Mr. Harrison's house, a sense of urgency propelled them forward. They had to find a way to clear Mrs. Hawthorne's name, to bring the truth to light. The ghostly whispers and the chilling presence that followed them were constant reminders of the stakes they faced. That night, as they gathered in Jake's basement to discuss their next steps, the air grew cold and the whispers returned. This time, however, they were clearer, more focused. "The truth lies buried. Bring it to light." Emma shivered, rubbing her arms to ward off the chill. "We need to find concrete evidence, something that proves Mrs. Hawthorne's innocence." Kevin nodded. "And expose Billy Preston's lies. If we can do that, maybe we can put her spirit to rest." Their journey was far from over, but they were closer to the truth than ever before. The presence of Mrs. Hawthorne's ghost, once terrifying, now seemed almost protective, guiding them towards justice. The past and present were intertwined, and only by uncovering the full story could they hope to free themselves from the haunting and bring peace to Mrs. Hawthorne's tormented soul. The urgency of their mission was palpable as the group continued their investigation. Armed with the knowledge of Mrs. Hawthorne's tragic past and the truth about Billy Preston, they were determined to find the concrete evidence needed to clear her name. But as they delved deeper, the haunting grew more intense, and Mrs. Hawthorne's ghost became increasingly desperate to communicate with them. The following morning, Jake was the first to arrive at school. As he walked through the empty hallways, he felt a sudden chill, and the whispers began again. This time, they seemed to form words, guiding him to the old faculty lounge. The room was dusty and abandoned, its furniture covered in white sheets. In the center of the room, an ancient blackboard stood, its surface smeared with chalk dust. Jake hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The door creaked shut behind him, and the whispers grew louder, almost insistent. He approached the blackboard, his heart pounding. As he lifted his hand to wipe away the dust, he noticed faint letters appearing on the surface, as if written by an unseen hand. Find the ledger. Hidden truths. His breath caught in his throat as he read the message. He quickly snapped a photo with his phone before the words faded away. This was the most direct communication they had received yet, and it filled him with both fear and hope. He needed to share this with the others. The group gathered in the library during their lunch break, huddling around Jake's phone. The photo of the blackboard's message was clear, and their expressions ranged from shock to determination. A ledger? Lisa asked, her eyes wide. What could that mean? Emma bit her lip, deep in thought. It must be something related to the school's finances. Maybe it has records that could prove Mrs. Hawthorne was innocent. Kevin nodded. And it would show if there were any discrepancies or irregularities that could link back to Billy Preston and his father. They decided to search the school's archives, a task that required both stealth and persistence. The archives were located in the basement, a dimly lit and rarely visited part of the school. The air was musty, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the corners. As they combed through old records and dusty files, the whispers returned, guiding them towards a locked cabinet. Jake, ever resourceful, managed to pick the lock with a hairpin he borrowed from Emma. Inside, they found a stack of old ledgers, their pages yellowed with age. Lisa carefully flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the entries. Here, she said, pointing to a series of transactions. These dates correspond to the time when Mrs. Hawthorne was accused. Look at this. Large sums of money being moved around, all linked to the Preston family. Mia's eyes widened. It's a cover-up. Billy's father must have paid off key people to ensure Mrs. Hawthorne took the blame. Jake took photos of the relevant pages, feeling a sense of triumph. They had found a crucial piece of evidence, but their victory was short-lived. As they left the archives, the air grew colder, and the whispers turned into anguished cries. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Do you hear that? It's like she's in pain. The group hurried to the gym, where the cries seemed to be the loudest. The gym was empty, the echoes of their footsteps bouncing off the walls. In the center of the court, they found a chilling sight, the word "help" scrawled in red across the floor. Kevin swallowed hard. We need to move fast. She's counting on us. With the ledger's evidence in hand, they decided to confront the current principal, Mr. Thompson. He was a stern but fair man who had always encouraged transparency. They hoped he would believe their findings and help them bring the truth to light. The principal's office was filled with the scent of polished wood and old books. Mr. Thompson listened intently as the group presented their evidence, his expression growing more serious with each passing minute. This is disturbing, he said finally, his voice heavy. If what you say is true, then a grave injustice has been done. We need to take this to the school board. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings and presentations. The school board was initially skeptical, but the evidence from the ledger and the testimony of Mr. Harrison began to sway their opinions. The final piece came when Emma bravely recounted their experiences with Mrs. Hawthorne's ghost, her voice filled with emotion. The board agreed to reopen the case and investigate further. The news spread through the school like wildfire, and the whispers that had once filled the halls began to fade. It was as if Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit knew that justice was finally within reach. That night, as the group gathered in the forgotten classroom, they felt a sense of peace for the first time in weeks. The air was still, and the oppressive presence that had once haunted them was gone. Mrs. Hawthorne's photograph sat on the teacher's desk, her eyes now appearing softer, almost grateful. Jake placed a hand on the desk, his voice barely above a whisper. "We did it. We're going to clear your name." A gentle breeze rustled through the room, and the group felt a warmth that seemed to wrap around them like a comforting embrace. They had taken a significant step towards uncovering the truth, but they knew their journey was not over. The final confrontation with the past was yet to come, and they would face it together, determined to bring justice to Mrs. Hawthorne and end the haunting once and for all. The school's decision to reopen the case brought a sense of hope, but it also stirred something darker. The group's nights were restless, plagued by vivid nightmares of shadowy figures and desperate cries for help. Mrs. Hawthorne's ghost, though less aggressive, still seemed tormented, her restless spirit not yet at peace. One evening, as they gathered in the library to plan their next steps, a strange tension filled the air. Lisa, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly stood up, her eyes glazed and unfocused. Her friends looked up in alarm as she began to mutter incoherently, her voice low and strained. "Lisa, are you okay?" Emma asked, reaching out to touch her arm. Lisa's head snapped up, and her eyes, now a deep, haunting shade of black, sent a chill down Emma's spine. "You can't stop me," she hissed, her voice an eerie echo. Kevin jumped to his feet. "What's happening to her?" Before anyone could react, Lisa's body convulsed, and she collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain. The lights flickered wildly, casting sinister shadows around the room. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic than ever, filling their minds with a cacophony of voices. Jake knelt beside Lisa, his heart pounding. "She's possessed. Mrs. Hawthorne is trying to communicate through her." Lisa's body stilled, and when she spoke again, it was with a voice that was not her own. "They lied. They betrayed me. Find the proof." Mia's hands trembled as she held on to Emma. "We have to help her. How do we get her out of this?" Jake's mind raced. "We need to make Mrs. Hawthorne understand that we're on her side. We need to show her that we believe her, and we're doing everything we can to bring the truth to light." Taking a deep breath, Jake placed his hands gently on Lisa's shoulders. "Mrs. Hawthorne, listen to us. We know what happened to you and we're going to clear your name. But you have to let Lisa go. She's our friend, and she doesn't deserve this." For a moment, the whisper stopped, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Lisa's eyes fluttered closed, and when she opened them again, they were back to their normal color. She gasped, taking in deep, shuddering breaths as her friends gathered around her. "Lisa, are you okay?" Emma asked, her voice filled with concern. Lisa nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. "I saw her. I saw everything. She's so angry, so hurt. We have to hurry. We don't have much time." The group knew they had to act quickly. They had discovered the ledger, but it wasn't enough. They needed something more. Something undeniable that would expose Billy Preston's lies and clear Mrs. Hawthorne's name once and for all. Kevin suggested they search the old gymnasium, a place that had been closed off for years due to renovations that were never completed. Maybe there's something there, something from back when Mrs. Hawthorne was teaching. The gymnasium was dark and dusty, the air thick with neglect. As they moved through the space, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, they felt a growing sense of unease. The whispers were faint but persistent, guiding them towards the locker rooms. In the back corner of the locker room, hidden behind a pile of old sports equipment, they found a small, locked metal box. Jake pried it open with a crowbar, revealing a collection of letters and photographs. The letters detailed the harassment and threats Mrs. Hawthorne had received from Billy Preston, begging for help that never came. Emma held up a photograph, her hands trembling. "Look at this. It's a picture of Billy and his father, standing outside the principal's office. The date matches the time when Mrs. Hawthorne was accused." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. They had found the proof they needed. With the letters and photographs in hand, they hurried to Mr. Thompson's office, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination. Mr. Thompson's face grew pale as he examined the evidence. This is undeniable. We need to present this to the board immediately." The following days were a blur of meetings and testimonies. The school board, now fully convinced of Mrs. Hawthorne's innocence, issued a formal apology and reinstated her reputation. News of the scandal and the Preston family's role in it spread quickly, tarnishing their legacy. That night, the group returned to room 217, hoping to finally put Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit to rest. As they entered the classroom, they felt a gentle warmth, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The ghostly figure of Mrs. Hawthorne appeared before them, her expression soft and grateful. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like a sigh on the wind. "You have given me peace." The room filled with a brilliant light, and as it faded, so did Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit. The whispers ceased, replaced by a serene silence. The haunting was over. The group stood in the empty classroom, a sense of accomplishment and relief washing over them. They had faced unimaginable horrors, but together they had brought justice to a wronged soul. Jake looked around at his friends, a smile tugging at his lips. "We did it. We really did it." Emma nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. She's finally at peace. As they left the school that night, the air felt lighter, the shadows less menacing. The haunted halls of Crestwood High were now just that, halls no longer filled with the tormented whispers of a restless spirit. The past had been laid to rest, and the future was theirs to embrace. With Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit laid to rest, the group felt a newfound sense of calm. However, the tranquility was short-lived. The halls of Crestwood High, though no longer haunted by the vengeful teacher, seemed to harbor another, more sinister force. The discovery of the Preston family's corruption had not only stirred the past, but awakened something darker within the school's walls. One late afternoon, as the group was finishing up their activities, the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. The once faint whispers returned, this time more malevolent and disorienting. The lights flickered violently, and the temperature plummeted. Kevin was the first to sense the change. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice tense. "We need to get out of here." They quickly gathered their belongings and made their way to the main entrance, only to find the doors locked and unyielding. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped inside the school. The whispers grew louder, forming a cacophony that seemed to come from all directions. Emma tried her phone, but there was no signal. "We're cut off," she said, her voice shaking. "We have to find another way out." As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, the sense of dread intensified. The shadows seemed to come alive, stretching and contorting in unnatural ways. Each step they took echoed ominously, as if the very walls of the school were closing in on them. Lisa, still recovering from her possession, clung to Jake's arm. "We need to get to the basement," she suggested. "There might be an emergency exit there." The group hurried down the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. When they reached the basement, the whispers became a roar, and the oppressive force seemed to grow stronger. The emergency exit was in sight, but as they approached, the door slammed shut with a resounding bang. Kevin tried to force it open, but it was as if an invisible barrier was holding it in place. "It's no use," he said, frustration evident in his voice. "Something doesn't want us to leave." Jake glanced around, his mind racing. There has to be another way. What about the old tunnels beneath the school? The ones they used during the renovations? Emma's eyes widened. "I remember reading about those. They're supposed to be sealed off, but maybe we can find a way in." With no other options, they made their way to the basement storage area, where the entrance to the tunnels was rumored to be. The air grew colder, and the whispers turned into guttural growls, as if warning them to turn back. Mia found a loose grate behind a stack of old boxes. "Here," she said, pulling it aside to reveal a dark, narrow passage. "This must be it." One by one, they squeezed through the opening and into the tunnels. The darkness was suffocating, and the air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. They used their phone flashlights to navigate the labyrinthine passages, their breaths echoing in the confined space. The further they went, the more disorienting the tunnels became. The growls and whispers followed them, creating an atmosphere of palpable fear. At every turn, they felt as if they were being watched, hunted by an unseen force. Lisa stumbled and fell, scraping her knee. Jake helped her up, his eyes scanning the darkness. "We have to keep moving. We're almost there." As they rounded a corner, they saw a faint light up ahead. Hope surged within them, and they quickened their pace. But just as they reached the light, the tunnel walls began to close in, the ceiling lowering as if the very structure of the school was alive and determined to trap them forever. Kevin pushed through the narrowing passage, his shoulders scraping against the walls. "Come on, we can make it!" They emerged into a small, dimly lit room, the school's old boiler room. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a heavy silence. The exit was in sight, a rusted door that led to the outside world. But as they approached, a shadowy figure materialized in front of it. It was Billy Preston. His ghostly form was twisted with rage and malevolence, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think you can expose my family and get away with it?" he snarled. "You'll never leave this place." Jake stepped forward, his voice steady. "We're not afraid of you, Billy. Your time is over. We're going to end this." Billy lunged at them, but as he did, the group held hands, forming a circle of solidarity and strength. The light from their phones seemed to intensify, creating a barrier that the ghost could not penetrate. With a final furious scream, Billy's form dissipated into a cloud of shadow, evaporating into the air. The door creaked open and the group stumbled outside into the cool night air. They were exhausted, bruised, but alive. The malevolent force that had trapped them was gone, and the school stood silent behind them. As they caught their breath, the reality of what they had endured began to sink in. They had not only freed Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit, but had also faced and defeated a lingering evil. The school was no longer a place of nightmares, but of courage and resilience. "We did it," Emma said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and awe. "We really did it." Jake nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. "And we'll make sure everyone knows the truth. No more secrets, no more lies." As they walked away from Crestwood High, they knew that their lives would never be the same. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, united by a bond forged in the crucible of fear. And though the shadows of the past had been laid to rest, the memories of their ordeal would remain with them forever, a testament to their bravery and determination. The group's encounter with Billy Preston's vengeful spirit had left them shaken but resolute. They knew their ordeal was far from over. There was one final confrontation ahead, and it would take place in the very heart of Crestwood High, the forgotten classroom where it had all begun. The following evening, they gathered once more, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. Mrs. Hawthorne's photograph, now a symbol of their quest for justice, was tucked safely into Jake's backpack. It was their talisman, a reminder of the promise they had made to right the wrongs of the past. The sun had set by the time they reached the school, casting long shadows across the grounds. The building loomed before them, its dark windows like eyes watching their every move. The air was thick with anticipation as they entered, the familiar whispers greeting them like an old adversary. "We have to go back to room 217, Jake said, his voice steady. "That's where it all began, and that's where it will end." As they made their way through the silent hallways, the temperature dropped, and the oppressive atmosphere intensified. The walls seemed to close in around them, the whispers growing louder, more urgent. They were not alone. The spirits of Crestwood High were restless, their fates intertwined with the group's mission. When they reached room 217, the door stood ajar, as if inviting them in. The classroom was just as they remembered it, the air thick with dust and the scent of decay. The old blackboard where they had first seen Mrs. Hawthorne's message loomed in the darkness. Lisa clutched the photograph tightly, her knuckles white. "We need to do this together," she said, her voice trembling. "No more secrets. No more lies." They formed a circle around the teacher's desk, placing the photograph at the center. The whispers swelled, filling the room with a cacophony of voices, each one telling a story of betrayal and injustice. Emma took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice clear and unwavering. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we have uncovered the truth. We know you were innocent, and we have exposed the lies that ruined your life. Please, let us help you find peace." As if in response, the air grew colder, and a ghostly figure materialized before them. It was Mrs. Hawthorne, her expression a mix of sorrow and relief. Her eyes, once filled with anger, now shone with gratitude. "You have done well," she whispered, her voice like a breeze rustling through leaves. "But there is one final task. You must confront the source of the corruption, the one who started it all." The group exchanged uneasy glances. They knew who she meant. Billy Preston. His spirit had been vanquished, but the malevolent force that had allowed his family's corruption to fester still lingered. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness, and a bone-chilling laughter echoed around them. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the shadows grew deeper, more menacing. In the center of the room, a figure began to take shape, a twisted, nightmarish version of Billy Preston, his eyes glowing with an unholy light. "You think you can defeat me?" The apparition snarled, his voice dripping with malice. "You are nothing but children, meddling in matters beyond your understanding." Jake stepped forward, his jaw set in determination. "We're not afraid of you. We faced your lies and exposed the truth. Your power over this place is broken." The apparition lunged at them, but they stood their ground, their resolve unshaken. Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit moved to stand beside them, her presence a protective shield against the darkness. "Your reign of terror ends here," she declared, her voice filled with righteous fury. "These brave souls have done what I could not. They have brought the truth to light, and now your hold on this school is broken." The room shook, and the walls seemed to close in, the shadows writhing and twisting. The group held hands, forming a circle of light that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. The whispers turned into screams, a cacophony of anguish as the malevolent force fought to maintain its grip. With a final deafening roar, the apparition of Billy Preston shattered, dissolving into a cloud of dark mist that dissipated into the air. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the room was filled with a blinding light that drove away the last remnants of the malevolent presence. When the light faded, the classroom was calm and still. Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit stood before them, her expression one of peace and gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "You have freed me and this school from a great evil. Go now and live your lives free from the shadows of the past." The group watched as her spirit slowly faded, the photograph on the desk glowing briefly before returning to its normal state. The haunting was truly over. As they left Crestwood High for the last time, the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the building. They walked in silence, the weight of their ordeal still heavy on their shoulders, but their hearts lighter knowing they had brought justice to a tormented soul. "We did it," Emma said finally, her voice filled with a sense of accomplishment. "We really did it." Jake nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "And we'll make sure everyone knows the truth. No more secrets, no more lies." As they walked away from Crestwood High, they knew their lives would never be the same. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, united by a bond forged in the crucible of fear. And though the shadows of the past had been laid to rest, the memories of their ordeal would remain with them forever, a testament to their bravery and determination. With the dark presence banished and Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit at peace, the group felt a weight lift from their shoulders. Yet they knew that their task was not fully complete. The curse that had hung over Crestwood High needed to be broken entirely, and the only way to do that was to ensure the school community understood the full truth of what had happened. The next morning, they gathered in Jake's basement to devise a plan. It was decided that they would present their findings at a school assembly, ensuring that the entire student body and faculty could hear the truth firsthand. Jake took the lead, compiling their evidence into a compelling presentation. The photos, letters, and diary entries were organized into a timeline that clearly illustrated the sequence of events leading to Mrs. Hawthorne's unjust downfall. Emma worked on her speech, crafting words that would convey the gravity of their discoveries and the importance of restoring Mrs. Hawthorne's reputation. Lisa, still recovering from her possession, focused on gathering support from sympathetic teachers and students who had experienced the supernatural events firsthand. Kevin and Mia spread the word discreetly, ensuring a large turnout for the assembly. On the day of the assembly, the atmosphere was tense. Whispers filled the hallways as students speculated about the announcement. The group stood nervously behind the stage, waiting for their cue. Mr. Thompson, the principal, gave them a reassuring nod before stepping up to the microphone to address the packed auditorium. "Today, we gather to discuss a matter of great importance," Mr. Thompson began, his voice carrying a tone of solemnity. "These students have uncovered a truth that has remained hidden for far too long. Please give them your full attention." Jake stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. As he began to speak, the auditorium fell silent. He outlined their investigation, presenting the evidence piece by piece. The photographs of Billy Preston, the ledger entries, and the letters were displayed on a large screen. Each revelation met with gasps and murmurs from the audience. Emma followed, her voice strong and clear. She spoke of Mrs. Hawthorne's dedication to her students, her unjust persecution, and the suffering she endured. "We owe it to her and to ourselves to acknowledge the truth," she concluded, "to ensure that such an injustice never happens again." Lisa stepped up next, her voice trembling slightly as she recounted her possession and the messages from Mrs. Hawthorne's spirit. We were guided by her, driven to uncover the truth and set things right. And now we ask for your support in breaking the curse that has haunted this school. Kevin and Mia added their voices, speaking of their own experiences and the courage it took to confront the darkness. We faced our fears, Kevin said, and we stood together. Now, we ask you to stand with us. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. The support from their peers and teachers was overwhelming, and they felt a renewed sense of hope. Mr. Thompson returned to the microphone. Thank you for your bravery and dedication. We will honor Mrs. Hawthorne's memory and ensure that her story is told. From this day forward, Crestwood High will be a place of truth and justice. In the weeks that followed, the school community rallied together. A plaque was installed in the main hall, commemorating Mrs. Hawthorne and acknowledging the wrongs done to her. The story of her innocence and the students' courage became a part of Crestwood High's legacy, a reminder of the importance of integrity and the power of truth. The group felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing they had fulfilled their promise. The whispers and shadows that had once haunted the school were gone, replaced by a sense of peace and renewal. As they stood together, looking at the plaque, they knew they had not only broken the curse, but had forged a bond that would last a lifetime. We did it, Jake said, his voice filled with pride. We really did it. Emma smiled, her eyes shining with tears. Mrs. Hawthorne is finally at peace, and so are we. As they walked away from the plaque, the sun shining brightly overhead, they felt the weight of their ordeal lift completely. The past had been laid to rest, and the future was theirs to embrace. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, united by their courage and determination. And though the memories of their journey would stay with them forever, they knew they had made a difference, a legacy of truth and justice that would endure for generations to come. Years had passed since the fateful events at Crestwood High School. The once haunted halls now buzzed with the usual life and energy of a thriving academic institution. The story of Mrs. Hawthorne, the injustice she had suffered, and the brave group of students who had uncovered the truth had become an integral part of the school's history, a lesson in courage and integrity that was passed down from one generation to the next. Jake, Emma, Lisa, Kevin, and Mia had graduated, each of them carrying the lessons they had learned into their futures. They remained close friends, their bond forged in the crucible of their shared ordeal. They often reflected on their experiences, grateful for the strength they had found in one another and the difference they had made. Jake had gone on to study journalism, driven by a passion for uncovering the truth and telling stories that mattered. His first major article was a detailed account of their investigation at Crestwood High, which garnered national attention and led to widespread recognition of their efforts. Emma pursued a career in theater, her talent for dramatic storytelling honed by the experiences she had faced. Her performances were lauded for their emotional depth and authenticity, and she often drew on the courage she had found during their quest for justice. Lisa, inspired by the scientific curiosity that had led her to uncover key evidence, became a researcher dedicated to uncovering the unknown and solving mysteries. Her work in forensic science brought her into contact with unsolved cases and injustices, which she approached with the same determination that had driven her to help Mrs. Hawthorne. Kevin's experiences had deepened his sense of justice and community. He became a lawyer, specializing in cases involving wrongful accusations and fighting for those who had been wronged by the system. His reputation for integrity and tenacity made him a respected figure in the legal community. Mia, with her practical mind and unwavering loyalty, found her calling in social work, advocating for children and families in need. She drew on the strength and compassion she had discovered during their ordeal to support those who were often overlooked and mistreated. Crestwood High itself had undergone a transformation. The plaque honoring Mrs. Hawthorne stood as a constant reminder of the school's commitment to truth and justice. New traditions had been established, including an annual event where students and faculty came together to share stories of courage and resilience, inspired by the legacy of the group who had confronted the school's darkest secrets. On the anniversary of the day they had broken the curse, the group returned to Crestwood High. They stood together in front of the plaque, reflecting on how far they had come and the impact they had made. The school was alive with laughter and learning, free from the shadows that had once haunted it. Jake placed a hand on the plaque, reading the inscription aloud. In memory of Mrs. Clara Hawthorne, whose spirit of dedication and justice lives on in the hearts of all who seek the truth. Emma smiled, her eyes shining with pride. We did good, didn't we? Lisa nodded, her expression thoughtful. We did, and we should be proud of what we accomplished. Kevin looked around at his friends, a sense of gratitude filling his heart. We faced our fears and made a difference. That's something that will always stay with us. Mia added, her voice firm and resolute. And we'll keep making a difference wherever life takes us. As they stood there, united by their shared history and the bonds they had formed, they knew that their story was far from over. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Their legacy of courage, integrity, and justice would continue to inspire others, ensuring that the shadows of the past would never again overshadow the bright future of Crestwood High. And as they walked away from the school, the sun setting behind them, they felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had broken the curse, brought justice to a wronged soul, and created a lasting legacy of hope and resilience. The future was theirs to shape, guided by the lessons they had learned and the strength they had found within themselves and each other.